Chapter X. The Manifesto Compromise. Let not that which I have appointed be polluted by mine enemies, by the consent of those who call themselves after my name, for this is a very sore and grievous sin against me, and against my people, in consequence of those things which I have decreed, and which are soon to befall the nations. D&C 101:97-98. The influence and example of such men as Joseph Smith, Brigham Young and John Taylor, left a deep imprint upon church members, but only a few would prove as faithful. The Lord was now about to test them by various means of persecution, including imprisonment by the Gentiles. Mortality was meant to be a test trial of men's faith. Under conflict and stress the qualities or weaknesses of men are brought to light, and the Crusades became the crucible to the verification or the failure of the Mormons. When a man defends his faith, right or wrong, he displays a courage that everyone is constrained to admire. Joseph once remarked, God, men, and angels will not condemn those that resist everything that is evil, and devils cannot, as well might the devil seek to dethrone Jehovah, as overthrow an innocent soul that resists everything which is evil. TPJS, page 226. One of the faithful men during these political crusades against the church was a Mormon bishop named Francis A. Brown. Before I will prove recreant to my wives and children, and betray my trust, I will suffer my head to be severed from my body. Bishop Francis A. Brown was one of those rare individuals who rose up to meet the conflict with a valor that will be admired by noble saints forever. It may be difficult to find a more inspiring and unyielding testimony than that which was given by this bishop. It was June 30, 1885, and one of the first cases in Weber County was the trial of Bishop Brown. The courtroom was crowded, and the defendant pleaded not guilty to the indictment against him for unlawful cohabitation. Bishop Brown at his own request was sworn as a witness, and so addressed the judge and the jury. He began by stating that his forefathers fought for freedom in the war for American independence. He had always honored the laws of his country and expressed a love of America. He joined the Mormon Church at the age of 20, and embraced the fullness of the gospel as revealed through the prophet Joseph Smith, and had been a member of the church for over 40 years. He knew the saints were a most loyal people, and that the doctrine of plural marriage was a most holy law of God, and he had accepted and embraced that celestial marriage covenant. He then said, I have struggled in poverty now for nearly 30 years, to provide for my beloved wives and dear children as a kind husband and a fond father should, and I have kept inviolate my solemn vows and most sacred contracts that I made with those women up to the present time, to the best of my ability, and I believe to their entire satisfaction. I now ask your honor what I am to do. Shall I break the most sacred obligations man can enter into and sever the strongest ties of love and affection that have grown up in the human heart? Shall I abandon my wives and children, who are as dear to me as any man's wife and children are to him, and cast them off upon the charities of a cold world? I know not of what metal your honor is composed, but for myself, before I will prove recreant to my wives and children, and betray my trust, I will suffer my head to be severed from my body. I have not wronged a man or a woman on the earth during my life that I am aware of. I have trespassed on no one's rights to my knowledge. This is the first time in my life I have been called to answer to the charge of crime against the laws of my country. No one ever heard me take the name of God in vain. No one ever saw me intoxicated. No one ever knew me to patronize houses of ill fame or gambling dens. I have lived above reproach and set a Christian example before my family and all the world, and no one can justly accuse me of violating the laws of my country, or of being guilty of committing any crime. Unless it is a crime to love my wives and children. If the conscience of the American people is outraged at my conduct in obeying what my conscience prompts me to be my duty to my God and demand my liberty, they are welcome to it. Decisions of courts, enactments of congresses, and edicts of tyrants strike no terror to me when they come in contact with mine own duty to my God. I bow submissively to an unconstitutional law which your honor has the power to execute. I am in your hands, and if your honor thinks it will subserve the interest of our country or benefit humanity in any way by inflicting pains and penalties upon me for doing what I know to be my duty to God, you can incarcerate me in prison. Death itself cannot obliterate the knowledge God has given me of this great latter-day work. I stand here innocent of any crime. I have a conscience void of offense before God and all men. I am guiltless of violating any law of God or constitutional law of the land. Now, while you are enjoying your liberty and the immunities of a free government, and while gamblers, libertines and prostitutes can revel in sin and corruption, without the fear of prosecution, or of being deprived of the liberty, remember me and my brethren, innocent of any crime, whom you are instrumental in depriving of our liberties. While you and yours are enjoying all the comforts and even luxuries of life, remember the innocent women and children you cause to suffer by tearing from them their only support. I have made up my mind that while water runs, or grass grows, and a drop of blood flows through my veins, or I am permitted to breathe the breath of life, I shall obey the supreme laws of my God, in preference to the changeable and imperfect laws of man. In conclusion, I wish to say to this court, as you are a stranger among us and ignorant of our doctrines and practices, that we honor and respect you as a representative of our great government. I entertain no malice in my heart towards this court or any of my accusers. ******* With what measure you mete unto others, it shall be measured unto you again. I expect to stand before the bar of God in the court above, and give an account of the deeds done in the body, and if I cannot obtain my rights in the courts on earth, I have no fear, but what I shall receive equity and justice at the hands of God in heaven, and I can afford to wait. May God have mercy upon this court, and all who are engaged in this unholy crusade against an honest, virtuous, industrious, and God-fearing people. History of Utah, Whitney, Vol. 3. 396-398. The courtroom listened in deep silence as his voice lingered like an echo of reality and conviction. Then the judge told the jury they were not to take any portion of the defendant's statement as evidence except to that portion to which he admitted to living with his wives as such, and that he had children by them. It took 12 minutes for the jury to find a verdict of guilty. The next day the Salt Lake Tribune even had to admit the valor of Bishop Brown by stating, 1. A. Brown, the Mormon saint convicted in Ogden on Tuesday last by his own testimony, had the courage of his convictions. However much one may deplore such wrong-headedness, the admission must be made that here is a man, one who does not quibble and lie, and who scorns to show the white feather. History of Utah, Whitney, Vol. 3:398. Editorials continued to come through the Deseret News advocating the laws of God over the inconsistent laws of man. Any man who says that he really and firmly believes a certain law of God binding on him, and who will not obey it in preference to a conflicting law of man or a decision of a court, has either an unsound mind or a cowardly soul, or is a most contemptible hypocrite. Day. News, July 7, 1886. The most faithful members of the church were being sent to prison in great numbers. But rather than concede to an unjust law, they were willing to suffer for a righteous principle. Roger Clausen relates, I was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment and was incarcerated 3 years and 1 month. I saw 300 of my brethren enter the penitentiary for similar reasons, and 220 of them emerged from prison while I was there. I feel none the worse for my experiences. My testimony is stronger than ever. It is pleasing to God for men to go to prison under an unjust law, rather than act contrary to their covenants. The brethren who were imprisoned exhibited great patience in the midst of the worst class of criminals. It was better for them to do this than to enter into an agreement not to serve God. Mill. Star 1:292. A few saints lost faith in their cause by signing an agreement to abandon the practice of plural marriage. Apostle George Teasdale depicted the nature of those who signed the compromise. Out of the 700 convictions for unlawful cohabitation up to July 1, 1888, but very few, not more than 50 perhaps, have been induced through proffers of clemency from the courts to give up their relationship with their families, and in many these cases the parties had lost their faith in the gospel. They were apostates. All had proffered to them the like clemency that is either a suspension of sentence altogether, or the punishment mitigated to the payment of a nominal fine. On condition, of course, that they promised to obey the law as interpreted by the courts, which meant the abandonment of their wives and their children, whom they had covenanted to love, protect and provide for. But to the everlasting honor of the very grand majority of the 700 who have been convicted of living with their wives and supporting their children, be it said, they scorned to stoop so low as to purchase the clemency of the courts at the price demanded for it. The loss of honor, self-respect, and every sense of noble manhood. Liberty is indeed a jewel, a pearl of great price, but desirable as liberty is, there are prices that ought not be paid for it, and in these exceptions we note honor, self-respect, and the rights of conscience. Whenever immunity from prison involves a sacrifice of all or any one of these things, every true man will spurn the gilded offer with the contempt it deserves. It is the preservation of these things to the individual that makes life worth the living. Once they are lost, liberty is thenceforth but a name, life a mockery, earth a hell, and heaven could it be entered by such characters which yield them no delight. Mill. Star L. 568, and Day. News, July 8, 1888. The saints as a body were weakening from the trials of persecution. They were being given a chance to accept their doctrines and the persecution that went with them, or they could manifest their will by concession with their enemies. On Monday, August 1, 1887, at a territorial general election, a new constitution of the state of Utah was voted upon and received over 13,000 votes, with only 502 against it. That constitution was opposed to the Celestial Law. On September 30, 1887, a report to the Utah Commission declared that the mass of the Mormons have taken the test oath and voted against polygamy. Ambrose Carlton, a member of the Utah Commission, wrote an article entitled Fair Play for Mormons. In it he said, "The next important step in the direction of reform was the holding of a constitutional convention of June 30, 1887, with delegates from all the counties in the territory. The Gentiles having declined to participate, the convention was composed entirely of Mormons. The constitution thus formulated contained a provision prohibiting polygamy and making it a crime, with a severe penalty, and at the August election following, 95% of all the Mormon voters in the territory voted for the ratification of this convention." Day. News, August 30, 1890. A Legislative Assembly, composed of 31 Mormons and 5 Gentiles, declared that all plural marriages are illegal and void, and made it a crime with a heavy penalty. Plural marriage was being defeated by the people who were supposed to sustain it. The battle had not yet begun, and the Mormons were already surrendering. The Lord had told them he would fight their battles. But before a shot was fired or blood was drawn, Mormons were raising the white flag. Apostle John W. Taylor seemed to carry on where his father left off. While traveling to the settlements in the south, he stopped to speak to the saints in Nephi. The Salt Lake Tribune reported on his talk by saying, "Having got thus far in his remarks, he became very earnest, if not very eloquent, and assured his hearers that as he understood Mormonism, when polygamy was a dead issue, the whole religion was dead. He did not wish to teach polygamy, but it was one of the principles of the religion, and if any of the principles of Mormonism were true and correct, this one was." March 6, 1889. On January 13, 1888, a bill was introduced to the Utah legislature by Hon. W.M. H. King, a portion of which would punish any polygamist with a fine of not more than $500, and imprisonment for a term of not more than 5 years. Day. News, January 14, 1888, by Now Press. Woodruff had declined to give temple recommends for plural marriages, and others would be required to carry on that work elsewhere. Elder Dan Jones, one of the stalwarts of Mormonism, was reported to have said, "Here's just the way it is. I want to baptize a convert and approach a pond. But just as we are getting over a fence, the owner calls out, 'Hey there. This is my property, you can't go in there.' So there is nothing left of us to do but hunt up some other body of water, and hunt it up we would, for without baptism, no man can enter the Mormon church, and as it is with baptism so it is with plural marriage, one cannot live up to the faith without practicing it, and if the United States government will not allow us to do this in Utah, what else is there but for us to look up a country where we can live unmolested in living our religion?" SL Tribune, August 15, 1889. The prophet Joseph testified that if the Lord's chosen people fail to continue his work, he will find others who will prove faithful and carry on that work. His word will go forth in these last days in purity, for if Zion will not purify herself, so as to be approved of in all things, in his sight, he will seek another people. TPJS, page 18. Heber C. Kimball also added testimony that many of the latter-day saints had already broken those covenants, and warned them of losing favor with God. Many of this people have broken their covenants. But you cannot do that, for God will cut you off and raise up another people that will carry out his purposes in righteousness, unless you walk up to the line in your duty. JD 11:145. While some of the Latter-day Saints were voting or signing oaths to do away with the belief and practice of plurality, others were just as busy defending the issue. In an editorial of the Church News came this thought-provoking statement: if the saints were to give up one tenet alleged to be the great object of aversion, another would be objected to with equal dislike and similar demands, and so on with every point receded from, until the creed of the Church would be entirely obliterated, and the saints themselves be trodden underfoot as they would deserve to be. Day. News, October 4, 1890. The Lord had warned the saints that these trials would continue, and the test would be severe. For he will give unto the faithful line upon line, precept upon precept, and I will try you and prove you herewith. And whoso layeth down his life in my cause, for my name's sake, shall find it again, even life eternal. D&C 98:12-13. Let no man be afraid to lay down his life for my sake, for whoso layeth down his life for my sake shall find it again. And whoso is not willing to lay down his life for my sake is not my disciple. D&C 103:27-28. Right bracket under the pressure from Gentile persecution, and over 90% of the saints wanting to abandon plural marriage, press, Woodruff was constrained to seek for an answer from the Lord. Abraham Cannon recorded the minutes of the meeting in which the resulting revelation was read. Thursday, Dec.199. During our meeting a revelation was read which press, Woodruff received Sunday evening, November 24. Propositions had been made for the Church to make some concessions to the courts in regard to its principles. Both of press. Woodruff's counselors refused to advise him as to the course he should pursue, and he therefore laid the matter before the Lord. The answer came quick and strong. The word of the Lord was for us not to yield one particle of that which he had revealed and established. He had done and would continue to care for his work and those of the saints who were faithful, and we need have no fear of our enemies when we were in the line of our duty. We are promised redemption and deliverance if we will trust in God and not in the arm of flesh. We were admonished to read and study the Word of God and to pray often. The whole revelation was filled with words of the greatest encouragement and comfort, and my heart was filled with joy and peace during the entire reading. It sets all doubts at rest concerning the course to pursue. Journal of Abraham Cannon. Excerpts from the revelation given upon this crucial issue follow. Let not my servants who are called to the presidency of my church deny my word or my law, which concerns the salvation of the children of men. *******. Place not yourselves in jeopardy to your enemies by promise. *****. If the saints will hearken unto my voice, and the counsel of my servants, the wicked shall not prevail. Let my servants who officiate as your counselors before the courts make their pleadings as they are moved upon by the Holy Spirit, without any further pledges from my priesthood. *****. Right bracket fear not the wicked and ungodly. *****. Awake, O Israel, and have faith in God and his promises, and he will not forsake you. *****. I cannot deny my word, neither in blessings nor judgments. Therefore let mine anointed gird up their loins, watch and be sober, and keep my commandments. 1889 Revelation through Wilford Woodruff, Revelations 1880-1890 pages 38-40, also Questions on Plural Marriage, Dennis Short, pages 61-63. Although many saints had hoped for a revelation that would revoke the law of plural marriage, the Lord continued to sustain his position that he cannot deny his word, D&C 3:2. The saints were free to accept or reject that principle, but it was an eternal law of the priesthood. Lorenzo Snow had testified that the Lord would not send a revelation to discontinue or revoke that law. In February of 1886, Apostle Lorenzo Snow had been convicted under the Edmunds Law and appeared in the First District Court in Ogden. Being asked if he had anything to say before receiving his sentence, he declared, "I married my wives because God commanded it. The ceremony which united us for time and eternity was performed by a servant of God, having authority. God being my helper, I would prefer to die 1,000 deaths than renounce my wives and violate these sacred obligations." The prosecuting attorney was quite mistaken in saying that defendant Mr. Snow was the most scholarly and brightest light of the apostles, and equally wrong when pleading with the jury to assist him and the United States of America in convicting Apostle Snow, and he WOULD predict that a new revelation would soon follow changing the divine law of celestial marriage. Whatever fame Mr. Bibauer may have secured as a lawyer, he certainly will fail as a prophet. the severest prosecutions have never been followed by revelations changing a divine law, obedience to which brought imprisonment or martyrdom. Though I go to prison, God will not change his law of celestial marriage. Mill. Star 48:110-11. Oppressive statutes from the government on the outside and verbal assaults from the saints on the inside left Woodruff with a serious and somber decision. But the Lord knew their problems. Such quandaries have always confronted the prophets and saints of God, and the Lord had already answered this question for the Latter-day Saints many years before by saying, "Therefore, be not afraid of your enemies, for I have decreed in my heart, saith the Lord, that I will prove you in all things, whether you will abide in my covenant, even unto death, that you may be found worthy. For if ye will not abide in my covenant ye are not worthy of me." D&C 98:14-15. But inasmuch as they keep not my commandments, and hearken not to observe all my words, the kingdoms of the world shall prevail against them. D&C 103:8. Be diligent in keeping all my commandments, lest judgments come upon you, and your faith fail you, and your enemies triumph over you. So no more at present. Amen and Amen. D&C 136:42. The temporal possessions of the saints were about to be confiscated. The government was proposing a bill which would not only take away all church property, but also all private property. The Mormon people now came to the ultimate test: would the temporal be sacrificed for the spiritual, or would they sacrifice the spiritual for the temporal? After considerable deliberation, Press. Woodruff replied, "I have arrived at a point in the history of my life as the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where I am under the necessity of acting for the temporal salvation of the Church. The United States government has taken a stand and passed laws to destroy the Latter-day Saints on the right bracket subject of polygamy, or patriarchal order of marriage, and after praying to the Lord and feeling inspired, I have issued the following proclamation, which is sustained by my counselors and the 12 apostles." Wilford Woodruff Journal, September 25, 1890. Those who stood to lose the most temporally were those who were crying the loudest. The financial interests of the saints were now their primary concern. Their spiritual interests became secondary. It was the wealthy saints, those with position and prestige, that put most of the pressure upon Woodruff for a manifesto. Joseph Musser recalls that on August 6, 1922, at a meeting held at the home of Nathan Clark, Bountiful, Lauren C. Woolley said, "The outsiders were not responsible for the issuing of the manifesto, but the responsibility rests upon the shoulders of such men as Geo. Q. Cannon B.P. Hiram Clausen, James Jack, Franklin S. Richards and John T. Kane, who worked incessantly with Press. John Taylor, from June to September of 1886, to get him to sign a manifesto." Other men who wrote letters urging the issuing of the manifesto were W. W. Reiter, Ira Hinckley, W. W. Clough, Abram Hatch and scores of other financial men. After the death of John Taylor, these men were hammering Press. Woodruff to death, trying to get a manifesto. They cried, "We want a manifesto or we will lose our property. The Gentiles will take it. They will take our banks, etc." They finally succeeded to get Press. Woodruff to surrender to them in 1890. Book of Remembrance of J. W. Musser, page 4. The Lord made it very evident what he wanted the saints to do. But only a small percentage of them would live celestial, or 3% to 5%. Very few of the monogamists were willing to defend plural marriage against such odds. One last hopeful but futile effort to rally the Mormon people in sustaining that principle appeared in the Deseret News. It was an editorial entitled "They Will Never Be Satisfied." The history of the Latter-day Saints has demonstrated, beyond a reasonable doubt, that it is useless for them to attempt to please the world or satisfy the demands made upon them by their enemies. No matter what they may say, it would not remove their right bracket opposition to the Church and their hatred of the saints. Their encroachments will never be stopped by submitting to their clamors, but every point yielded will only encourage them in their oppressions and increase their determination to destroy. If the saints were to give up one tenet alleged to be the great object of aversion, another would be objected to with equal dislike and similar demands, and so on with every point receded from, until the creed of the Church would be entirely obliterated, and the saints themselves be trodden underfoot as they would deserve to be. Whatever is done by the Church, or its leaders, or its members, should always be done in this spirit. Be sure you are right, then go ahead. Never mind what the world may say or do. Never think to gain their favor by yielding to their requirements. When a thing is right, do it. When it is wrong or unwise, refrain from it. Let the wicked rage. Let the heathen imagine vain things. But be not swerved to the right or the left by what they may howl, nor think for a moment that they will ever be satisfied. Day. News, October 4, 1890. The Lord revealed to his servants what they should do, but most of the saints did not want to do it. Because of this contention, Woodruff asked the Lord what should be done. The Lord offered the saints two choices and they were free to make their own decision. Shortly before Wilford Woodruff issued the manifesto, he was shown by the Lord two courses in vision. First, stand for the law and let the Gentiles and government confiscate both church and individual property, and leave the battle for the Lord to fight. Second, issue the manifesto, hold on to the property, but open the way for whoredom and destruction among the people. The second plan prevailed and whoredom is rampant throughout the land, and the faith of the saints has been greatly weakened. Lauren Woolley, Joseph Musser Reminiscences. The Lord had given many revelations regarding the sacredness of the principle of plural marriage, but most saints were unfamiliar with those revelations. They were tired and sorely tried at maintaining such principles. They were scared and willing to give up to their enemies. When Woodruff presented the manifesto, they eagerly grasped it. The manifesto promised to be a release from so many of their troubles. But the manifesto was not a revelation, and it did not read like a revelation. Even the Gentiles detected that. The Salt Lake Tribune responded to Woodruff's manifesto in the following manner. He speaks merely as an individual. He does not speak as though that advice had come authoritatively by revelation, but as a poor human being in perplexity, he gives to his flock the advice of a patriarch. We cannot resist the thought that this was not prompted by President Woodruff at all, but that it was prompted by shrewd men in the church, and that the object is purely political. S.L. Tribune, September 26, 1890. Bishop Heber Bennion also made the same deduction. Abraham Lincoln belonged to no church, but he never wrote an important public document that did not contain some reference to the Supreme Being, and yet this manifesto, supposed by many to be a revelation to revoke and annul the revelations of God to Joseph Smith and John Taylor, does not contain the remotest reference to the Supreme Being, much less "Thus saith Lord." Supplement to Gospel Problems, page 64. Thus the manifesto was not a revelation from God, but an alternative escape from a principle of the gospel that required a sacrifice. Those who support or sustain the manifesto must justifiably answer the following questions. 1. Should the laws of man supersede the laws of God? 2. Can eternal principles of the gospel change? 3. If plural marriage is ever forbidden by the Lord, it would be because of unworthiness of the individuals. A. Over 90% of the Mormons refused to live that law. B. They refused to defend that law against the threats of their enemies. C. They had eagerly asked for, and willingly accepted, a chance to discard that principle. Could such a people still be classified as valiant and worthy of celestial glory? 4. When the enemies of God threaten his saints, must we assume that he will not intervene in their behalf, as he did for Noah, Abraham, Moses, etc.? 5. If the manifesto was given because the saints should obey the laws of the land, why was section 132 of the D&C given in a state that forbid it? And why wasn't the manifesto given in 1862 when Lincoln signed a bill against polygamy? 6. If the manifesto was sanctioned by the Lord, why didn't he give it sooner, so that many saints wouldn't have had to go to prison and suffer so much persecution? 7. Could men who peacefully lived monogamy after the manifesto receive the same glory as those before the manifesto, who suffered so much for living plural marriage? 8. Would God place such importance upon that principle from the beginning of this dispensation and continue emphasizing that importance right up to a few months before the manifesto and then suddenly put it aside as a non-essential? 9. Would the Lord give a strict law that only those men who lived plural marriage were worthy of presiding in the church, then suddenly change that law so that polygamists were unworthy to preside at all and should even be excommunicated? 10. If the manifesto was meant to stop plural marriage, why were so many such marriages continued in Canada, Mexico, and the U.S.? 11. If the manifesto was the Lord's will to stop plural marriage, why did so many apostles and several presidents of the church continue to live, teach and encourage that practice? 12. Would God allow the enemies of the church to destroy the temples, and then put to death all the worthy saints, and allow the gospel and the priesthood to be destroyed from off the face of the earth, without fighting their battles for them as he had promised? Right bracket. All these variances are like a compass continually pointing to different directions. Such a compass would be worthless and fit to only be thrown away. A gospel that continually changes its course is not worth any more than a broken compass. In regard to the acceptance of the Manifesto by the Church, there is a very sad commentary much too evident to be overlooked. The Church has never received another written revelation from the Lord. Nothing else has ever been added to the Doctrine and Covenants as though the Manifesto stood there blocking the way. Whenever the revelations of heaven are rejected and denied by anyone, then no more will be given to them. Nearly every other spiritual gift and power has also gradually diminished from the Church. It is evident that when men take a stand against the doctrine and revelation of plural marriage, they forfeit many blessings they could have otherwise enjoyed. Joseph Musser quoted John H. Butt in this matter. Father cannot bring to pass the things that are shortly to transpire with men in power who have openly or secretly, directly or indirectly, raised their hands against plural marriage. John H. Butt claims this to have been told him by Joseph Smith in dream or vision. Book of Remembrance J. W. Musser, page 17. And the Saviour had also previously said, Whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. Matt. 10:33. A year after the Manifesto, a letter of amnesty was written to Benjamin Harrison, President of the United States. It was written with the intention of obtaining relief for the Mormon people from any further prosecutions as criminals. It explained their compromise with the government by voluntarily giving up part of their religious principles to obtain that peace. Salt Lake City, Utah. December 19, 1891. We, the First Presidency and Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, beg respectfully to represent to Your Excellency the following facts. We formerly taught to our people that polygamy, or celestial marriage, as commanded by God through Joseph Smith, was right, that it was a necessity to man's highest exaltation in the life to come. To be at peace with the government and in harmony with their fellow citizens who are not of their faith, and to share in the confidence of the government and people, our people have voluntarily put aside something which all their lives they have believed to be a sacred principle. As shepherds of a patient and suffering people, we ask amnesty for them, and pledge our faith and honor for their future. And your petitioners will ever pray. Wilford Woodruff H. J. Grant. George Q. Cannon John Henry Smith. Joseph F. Smith John W. Taylor. Lorenzo Snow M. W. Merrill. Franklin D. Richards Anthony H. Lund. Moses Thatcher Abraham H. Cannon. Francis M. Lyman. Contributor 13:197. In 1904, during the Smoot hearings at Washington, D.C., President Joseph F. Smith was confronted by government officials who stated that a revelation making plural marriages obsolete had not appeared in the Book of Doctrine and Covenants. They expected the revelation sanctioning plural marriage should either be taken out or else a revelation forbidding it should be published in the D&C. Joseph F. Smith indicated that it would appear in the next D&C, but when the next edition was published in 1907, the book was published without a date, and it did not include the Manifesto either. Finally, after much criticism and demands, it was published in the D&C of 1911. The prophet Isaiah looked upon the world's future and said, The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Isa. 24:5. Right bracket. Every dispensation has broken the everlasting covenant and slipped into a state of apostasy, usually without knowing it. Our own dispensation is suffering from this same peril. Joseph Fielding Smith once commented on this particular passage of Scripture by saying, Are we not too much inclined to blame the generations that are past for the breaking of the new and everlasting covenant, and to think it is because of the great apostasy which followed the apostles in primitive times? Perhaps we should wake up to the realization that it is because of the breaking of covenants, especially the new and everlasting covenant, which is the fullness of the gospel, that the world is to be consumed by fire, and few men left. Since this punishment is to come at the time of the cleansing of the earth when Christ comes again, should not the latter-day saints take heed unto themselves? We have been given the new and everlasting covenant, and many among us have broken it. Day. News, October 17, 1936. The Latter-day Saints instigated a compromise with their enemies in 1890 with the Manifesto. They further supported and sustained that same position again in 1904. Later in 1933 their position was reinforced, and anyone who believed, taught or practiced plural marriage was excommunicated. The Manifesto had created a reversal of belief in that principle. That which was once taught as a most holy principle was now twisted to become a sin next to murder. But this was not all. A careful analysis of what occurred at the issuance of the Manifesto is now very evident. 1. Most of the Latter-day Saints wanted the compromise of a manifesto because they were afraid of losing their temporal goods to their enemies. 1. Mormons yielded voluntarily to the demands of their enemies. 1. The Saints had sustained and supported the doctrine of plural marriage as a revelation and an eternal principle of the gospel, but they chose to abandon it by voting it out of their faith. 1. They knew what was right but favored that which was wrong. 1. They chose an appeasement and a compromise with their enemies, rather than a sacrifice for their God. 1. They yielded one point of their religion only to learn that their enemies would demand more and more from them, until they were bound by thousands of obnoxious and unconstitutional laws, bills, and ordinances. 1. By making one major concession, they learned that it became easier and easier to make others. 1. They were more concerned about what their enemies would do to them if they continued that holy law than what God would do to them if they forsook it. 1. They sacrificed a principle of the gospel for the favors and praise of the worldly. By sustaining, supporting and accepting the unconstitutional laws of the land, they voluntarily rejected one of the most holy and sacred laws of God. 1. By making compromises and concessions to their enemies, they left a most dreadful example for all others who may look to them as a pattern to follow. The Manifesto was the result of weak faith in the majority of the Mormon people. Many notable and realistic scholars and historians now review the Manifesto as a political compromise, rather than a spiritual revelation. The able historian, Dr. Henry J. Wolfinger, researched and explained this gradual abandonment of plural marriage by saying, "This paper seeks to offer a new approach to the Manifesto, one which argues that the Church's surrender was a slow process of yielding up the practice of polygamy, rather than a sudden moment of capitulation." A re-examination of the Woodruff Manifesto, Utah Historical Quarterly, Fall 1971, page 329. Such views had been expressed before but not accepted by those who used the Manifesto as a divine excuse to disobey that law. Matthias Cowley explained, "During the agitation in Washington for more drastic measures against the Latter-day Saints, Utah's right bracket representative at the Capitol had not unfrequently declared that polygamy was a dead issue. There were strong political sentiments in favor of some sort of a compromise, and President Woodruff had been importuned to recede from his former attitude on that important principle." Life of Wilford Woodruff, page 569. The Salt Lake Tribune of January 16, 1906, exposed the plot behind the Manifesto. The headlines read, "Manifesto only trick to beat devil at own game." The political schemers of the Church decided on a political manifesto with the federal government to beat them at their own game. They conceived the idea that if they made the polygamy concession with the government, they would then obtain statehood. As a state, they would introduce a law which would provide protection for those who lived plural marriage. They gained their statehood and finally introduced a bill which would allow a religious practice of plural marriage in the state. It was just 5 years after Utah became a state that the bill protecting polygamists was introduced on the 6th of March 1901 by able John Evans. It was Senate Bill No. 113, amending Section 4611 of the Revised Statutes of Utah. But the governor, Heber M. Wells, a product himself of plural marriage, vetoed the bill with the excuse that it offered the polygamists only a false hope of protection. So that ray of hope that the Manifesto was written for was shattered in 1901. Then, instead of laws being amended by the state for the protection of polygamists, the laws turned worse, and in 1934 plural marriage was made a felony. Thus, the Manifesto became a concession which resulted in a disaster for one of God's most holy laws.